Okay, good afternoon again. So at this moment, we will be starting our webinar on how to avoid the 3 biggest pitfalls that lead to project failure. Jim is the director of SDI Project Management Organization. He will be guiding us through this webinar. He's been working in project leadership in supply chain logistics for more than 25 years now. And he has been managing capital projects as Assistant Vice President, Director of Engineering in the past years. And now he's been working 2 years in SDI and is helping us in our efforts to become a world-class provider for material handling solutions. So, Jim, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Today we'll be talking about the pitfalls that lead to project failure, and talking them not in the context of traditional project management, but talking about them in the context of how the world's changed. We've all seen the world change a lot, and we're very aware of those changes, but how do they really impact project management, and why is it that things that were successful in the past aren't necessarily going to get you the results you're looking for today? So we're going to be focusing on 3 of the biggest pitfalls that we're seeing today leading to project failure. We'd like to start with just a question for the audience that as to what you see as the biggest pitfall leading to project failure in your experience. Poor leadership, overly aggressive scheduling, people reacting with emotion instead of logic, all of those reasons or none of those reasons?
Okay, so I've shared the poll. Please get your answers in and we'll be looking over them in a couple of seconds. Okay, we've got almost all the questions in. I'll close it and share the answers with you. So we've got 38% that says one of the biggest pitfall is poor leadership, 13% overly aggressive schedule, and 50% that says all of the above.
So it's interesting. One answer to this would be none of the above. And it's not that we're not seeing poor leadership and aggressive scheduling. Certainly we're seeing those things. But what I find is that they're more symptoms than they are the root cause. So I think we want to look at all these things, but then look at them more deeply as to what leads to it, what constitutes poor leadership, and perhaps why is it that someone who was a good leader in the past is not a good leader today. So we see all of these things occurring in project, right? Often derailing them. Poor leadership, overly aggressive scheduling, and reacting emotionally. And there, well, in the poll, there wasn't anyone who looked at the third thing, but I think it's our culture and nature that we look more to the physical things that happen. But people play a big part of projects, and certainly, you know, the way people interact with a project certainly does impact its success. Again, these are symptoms, so we want to dig deeper to find a root cause. Because ultimately, what I find is that we're applying old techniques in a drastically changed environment. And those old techniques are not going to work anymore, and we'll talk about why they aren't going to work anymore. So we'll start by looking at where is it we are going and how do we get there? All right, start with the end in mind. So project management in the new millennium, what is it that we're striving for? The first thing, I think one of the things we're striving for is less stress. It may sound like an odd thing when you're talking about a technical discipline, but what I found is that we did a vision for 2018 within our own company, and one of the things we first talked about was less stress. And I think it's something everyone can resonate with. We all feel we're supposed to buck up and do the job and, you know, just fight through it. But the stress is a reality. It's a real factor. It limits people's ability to be effective. It limits people's ability to think clearly, and ultimately limits people's ability to make good decisions. There's been ample studies that have proven, and Malcolm Beckwith wrote some interesting, noted some of this research in some of his books, but there's been research that's noted that when people get stressed out, when they start getting panicked, you can monitor their brain activity, and the first area that shuts down is the frontal lobe area, the reasoning power. So the moment we get into that stress mode, it's the way our bodies are wired and the way our minds are wired. We actually default to primal instincts. We default to a survival instinct. And that reasoning power, which is associated with activity in the frontal lobe area of the brain, actually shuts down. And you can see this graphically. You can see, you know, where the electrons are firing in the brain and what areas of the brain are lighting up. And so that stress is a genuine factor in making good decisions or poor decisions. The next thing I think we're all striving for is better visibility to what's coming. The old adage of no surprises. It's the unexpected things that tend to derail a project. Another thing that we're striving for is more coordination and partnership. And this is something we'll talk a bit about and how it's important and how it impacts project management. And ultimately, these are the things that'll lead to a successful project. When you can keep the stress levels down and people can work together and work calmly and they're all on the same page because they know what's coming, they know what's going on. Now, if these are the pitfall symptoms, what are the root causes to these things? What are the root causes to poor leadership, overly aggressive scheduling, and people reacting emotionally and shutting down? And we'll talk about each of these three and what leads to them. We'll start by talking about poor leadership. And this is what's listed as the third pitfall, although certainly in the poll, it was considered the #1 pitfall. So a lot of people clearly look to this as being the biggest factor. That pitfall, the root cause, part of the root cause of poor leadership is, of course, just having the wrong person in the job. Not everyone is meant to, you know, actually better suited, or their background is in another area. But a broader problem that I'm seeing in a lot of project leaders that I deal with is a failure to adjust project leadership to the changing worlds we live in. And we'll talk about how that changes. So how has project leadership shifted over the past 2 decades? Because really, what you see is people trying to lead projects the same way they would have been led 10, 20 years ago. I've been in this 30 years, and I haven't really seen much change over those 30 years in the way people lead projects or try to lead projects. But I have seen a lot of change in what the requirements are for project leadership. So one of the first things we need to deal with is more information. There's just inundated with information now compared to where it used to be. Another thing is there's less time. Not that there was ever a lot of time, but with the flattening of organizational structures and the pressure to run lean, people have even less time than they do today, than they did previously. And then there's a much greater complexity. They're not just mechanical systems, there's software and interfaces, and the mechanical systems themselves are becoming more complex. And all this is leading. Interestingly, these are all cumulative. That more information, that being inundated for more information, is directly leading to less time. When you look at executives of companies now, it's not uncommon at all for them to get even hundreds of emails a day. So it's very interesting that the more responsibility you have in an organization, the more emails you tend to get. So you're actually, if you were to assume that the people who are being given more responsibility are your best players, which is a pretty safe assumption, or you're not making very good choices as a company. But if you assume that your leaders and the people that are gain more responsibilities because of their value to the company, because of their insight they offer, and the wisdom they offer, and their experience they offer, you're actually taking the most effective people, the most impactful people in your organization, and they're the ones you're putting on the bench. They're the ones you're taking out of the loop because they're getting inundated with emails and end up having the least amount of time to actually be responding to what's going on and leading. So the more information is directly leading to less time, and the more responsibility, the worse that gets. And again, that more information is great to have the information, but now it's leading to greater complexity. Everyone has a different view. An event happens, we all know 5 people have a different view of it. Well, suddenly now you're getting everyone's view, and you're getting flooded with all these different views. And while that can give you a much broader and deeper understanding of what's going on, it can also confuse the hell out of you. Pardon my French. It can also take you still mentally have to try to sift through all that information and process all these different information you get. And you have to kind of link it. You go from one subject to another, and now suddenly you get another view of something. Oh, okay, now you're trying to remember, right, the trail to that story. What else do I know about that? And then ultimately that leads to more complex, right? The stress it directly leads to the stress. You've got all this information. Now you've got less time to deal with the actual work you're trying to get done. It's all becoming more complex. And all this, eventually makes the brain melt and leads to that stress. So how has it shifted? Again, we talked about it, more information, and that inundated with information. We're coming out of the information age, right? The Piscean age was known as the information age. Well, that's over. We're now absolutely as much information as you can imagine right at our fingertips. But we don't have yet the tools to deal with it. We're not wired yet to deal with it. We haven't learned how to deal with all that information yet. So the problem is not getting that information. The problem is too much, and it's driving tremendous inefficiencies in the workplace. So project leadership, right? How can we all be more successful as project leaders, right? Wherever we are, how can we be more successful? If we're good, if we're okay, how can we be better? If we're good, how can we be great? If we're great, there's always room for all of us to improve. And so that's what we're really looking at here, is not where does someone fall on that project leadership scale, because it's not really important to make that judgment. It's really for each of us, and how can we improve? So the first thing we better talk about is dealing with this overflow of information. As we said, the age of information is over. This is the age of awareness. This is about having that awareness of how to sift through all that information. And the antiquated idea of providing information is contributing greatly to the less time, as we already spoke of. Communication is a key and a topic unto itself. And really, you could put communication as the backbone of any of these things, right? Project leadership. I'm framing it up in terms, we're framing it up today in terms of that stress and that emotional reaction, because I think that's where you see communication, whether it's good or bad, having the biggest swing in the morale of a project, even though it really impacts all areas. So certainly it's a backbone of project leadership, but we'll discuss that a little later in the webinar. So again, we need to understand the very fundamental shift and acknowledge the very fundamental shift in project leadership of today versus 10 or 20 years ago, right? A boss says go, and that's the old style. It was very hierarchical, and the person in charge had the person reporting to them, and when they said do it, it's time to do it. Now a leader says, let's go. And it's like, if any of you watched the movie Whale Rider, it kind of touches on that whole thing of, it's a great movie, by the way. I recommend Whale Rider. And it talks about how leadership has changed and how it's like a group. It's, you know, it's more of a team approach to leadership now. So again, the project management style of the past can best be summed up by the style of you lead, I'll follow. Today, we see that philosophy falling apart in business, in religion, in politics, and even in Hollywood, right? The directors and everyone in Hollywood, it's like, who are you? The actor should have the power, right? We're the ones doing the acting. In religions, you know, there's a lot of rebel. People are leaving religious communities. At the same time, they're becoming more spiritual because they say, well, whatever this power is, it's within me. I don't want to be told by someone else, this is how I should practice my religion. And you see it in business. You know, it's just the political structures are falling apart. So you can sure as heck believe that that philosophy doesn't fly anymore in project management either. And again, this is just sort of a graphic of that old ineffective do as I say approach, right? You've got a boss, the people who report to the boss, the people who report to the boss's underlings, and so on and so on. This was very common hierarchical 20 or 30 years ago. And the companies, frankly, that were slow to get away from that approach really struggled mightily as they came into the 90s and into the 2000s. And some of the newer companies that did not take this, and sometimes it's referred to as like the boys club approach, right? Or the old boys club. And, you know, really sort of getting a bad name that it deserved. And again, we're moving away from this as a world. So the key becomes teamwork, visibility, and transparency. It's no longer about, this is the key to leadership. It's no longer about telling people what to do. It's about developing teams. It's about having visibility and transparency that allow everyone to connect. In other words, it's not a vertical connection anymore. It's not a vertical hierarchy where I'm going to tell you this, tell you this, tell you this, you report up to me. It's horizontal, lateral communication. It's this department talking with this group, talking with that group. And that's the type of communication that you need. And so that communication is at the very center of things. And then coming off of that, you've got the teamwork that the communication can facilitate if it's the right kind of communication. You can have documented milestones so everyone's marching to the same beat. And then that daily follow-up, that weekly meetings, that accountability at every level. You can no longer say the buck stops here. The buck stops lots of places. You know, it's everyone needs their clearly defined role. And it's not that the buck stops here, I'm the boss, so ultimately it ends with me, right? No, it's about this person or group doing their job and this person or group doing their job. And then that's what'll drive results. So that's where you're really coming from project management and project leadership in the new millennium. And that's what's going to get you to your end goal of having results, right? Which is what we're all going for. Just a quick look, SDI's project management structure. And the first time I shared this with our CEO, Chris, for a presentation he was making to a client, he said, Jim, you know, this is kind of convoluted, but I think it's pretty accurate. I guess it has to be convoluted. And by the way, convoluted may not be the word he used, but he probably put it more diplomatic than that. But really, the point in showing this slide is that it's just not, it's just all about that lateral communication. If I really wanted to put all the arrows on here, the people who need to be talking and connected to each other, this thing would look like a plate of spaghetti. You know, you wouldn't even be able to identify the lines. So as much as this may look a little bit complex, it's actually overly simplified in terms of the communication structure. But the key to being a leader, right, the director of project management org, the key to being a leader, a successful leader these days, is not about telling everybody what to do, but you've got to be communicating to some degree with everybody. And that's where you've got to be very judicious and really know how to leverage communication, because it's a silo and not connected to the rest of the group. It's like grapes on a vine. They thrive by being connected to the other grapes on the vine. So, you know, everybody's got to be connected. And it's very interesting. I've only come to realize after 30 years that mine is a project, when I'm in the role of a project leadership, my role, or a person's primary role in project leadership, is actually to facilitate communication, to be an expert at communication. You know, within our company, we've got people that execute every single piece of it and execute it very well, or they're going to cause someone else to fail. And then be, why do you cause me to fail? So it really comes down to that. And so another question about, I'm sorry, was someone else talking? I don't think anyone else. So we'd like to do another quick poll. Of these, what's the most important attribute for a leader? Compassion, integrity, commitment, or fostering teamwork?
Okay, Jim, I've shared the poll. We're waiting for the audience to answer.
Great.
Okay, let me close the poll and share the results. So we have most important attributes for a leader: integrity, 42, commitment, 25, fostering teamwork, 33, and 0 for compassion. So I'll let you go.
First of all, thank you all for, oh, quite all right. First of all, thank you all for participating in this poll, because it's really fascinating and it's great feedback for I think all of us to get this type of information from the group. And I do have to say that the numbers are not what I would have expected. Not that my expectations matter. So it's interesting that it's 0% compassion, and I can sort of see that, right? It's a touchy-feely thing. It doesn't really sound like it has much to do with project leadership. And you know, fostering teamwork is 33%. And so again, the way I view a view of that is to avoid failure. I believe that each attribute is essential to today's project leadership. The reason I feel that way personally is that the first 3 qualities are prerequisites to achieving teamwork. For me, if you don't have teamwork, a project is failed before it began. You know, you see this often in sports. They often say that it's not necessarily the team with the best athletes that win. It's the team with players who work together. And in business, I have found time and time again over 30 years that the success and the ease of a project is directly proportional to how much teamwork there is and how well. I remember working once you know, a $30 million project in Charlotte, and the contractors and the installers, it just happened that from day one, there was just great chemistry, and it seemed like the project ran itself. It really just was really an amazing thing. And afterwards, a number of people commented to me, including the general contractor, that it was the most fun they had ever had on a project. And I felt the same way. It was probably the most fun I had ever had on a project too. It just happened that everybody clicked. But not everybody's always going to get along. Sometimes you can get extremely different personalities. And as a project leader, it's like the coach of a team. It's your job to somehow create that synergy and to put everyone in the roles they're comfortable with, to give them the support that they need. And different people have different needs. And that's where I'll come back to these things that lead to the teamwork that's so essential. Without compassion, you aren't going to be as effective as a leader as you can. You aren't going to be supporting someone in the way that they need, because compassion is about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And if you can do that, you realize that you have a person on your team who just needs to know. Give me the facts. If you give that person the facts, they are just going to do a great job for you. Some people just need recognition, right? They don't really need the information. They've got the information. They've been doing their job for a while, but they do it so well that nobody pays attention to them. No one ever has to talk to Sue or Fred or whoever it is, because that person gets the job done without ever being spoken to. So through compassion, you realize, hey, give this person some kudos. They're just off, you know, not seeking any glory off in a corner, but they're really looking for it. And then another person, if you put yourself in their shoes, you might realize they're completely stressed out. So as a leader, you want to tell that person, look, how can I help you? What can I do for you? Just the fact that you asked and you listened to them, you may not actually do anything ever to help them, but you already have helped them. Just the fact that someone cares about the fact that they're stressed out, that recognizes it. They don't feel that they're on an island anymore, or at the end of the plank, you know, on a pirate ship with 10 people screaming, pointing swords at them. So you really need that. It's in a way, there's a whole separate, right, situational leadership. Someone came out and did a great job, and I took that program myself, and it benefited me a lot. But to really have situational leadership, you need that compassion. And it doesn't take a lot of time. If you can resonate with that person, if you can zero in on what that person needs to support you, and you can feel their pain, so to speak, understand where they're coming from, not where you're coming from. Bridging that gap will save you so much time. You spend 15 minutes doing that, it might save you 2 hours a week for the rest of your life, you know, because that person becomes more effective and your relationship with that person becomes more effective. And then you need integrity. Without integrity, forget it, the game's over. You know, the communication doesn't have any vitality. The words that you say do not have any life force if you don't believe them. If that's not something that you're living, I'm sharing with you, right or wrong, how I live my life, what I found to be successful for 30 years, and that has a certain vitality. I could read you from a book saying, oh, this guy did this and it sounds good to me, right? It would not have the same energy or the same force to it. That integrity is the blood. It's the life of words. It's the blood flow of the words, right? The life that is within the words comes from integrity. And then you need commitment. This is very interesting because someone once commented to me on a project.
Okay, let me close the poll and share the results. So we have most important attributes for a leader: integrity, 42, commitment, 25, fostering teamwork, 33, and 0 for compassion. So I'll let you go.
First of all, thank you all for, First of all, thank you all for participating in this poll, because it's really fascinating and it's great feedback for I think all of us to get this type of information from the group. And I do have to say that the numbers are not what I would have expected. Not that my expectations matter. So it's interesting that it's 0% compassion, and I can sort of see that, right? It's a touchy-feely thing. It doesn't really sound like it has much to do with project leadership, and fostering teamwork is 33%, and so again, the way I view a view of that is to avoid failure. I believe that each attribute is essential to today's project leadership. The reason I feel that way personally is that the first 3 qualities are prerequisites to achieving teamwork. For me, if you don't have teamwork, a project is failed before it began. You know, you see it so often in sports. They often say that it's not necessarily the team with the best athletes that win. It's the team with players who work together. And in business, I have found time and time again over 30 years that the success and the ease of a project is directly proportional to how much teamwork there is and how well. I remember working once a $30 million project, and Charlotte and the contractors and the installers. It just happened that from day one, there was just great chemistry, and it seemed like the project ran itself. It really just was really an amazing thing. And afterwards, a number of people commented to me, including the general contractor, that it was the most fun they had ever had on a project. And I felt the same way. It was probably the most fun I had ever had on a project too. It just happened that everybody clicked. But not everybody's always going to get along. Sometimes you can get extremely different personalities. And as a project leader, it's like the coach of a team. It's your job to somehow create that synergy and to put everyone in the roles they're comfortable with, to give them the support that they need. And different people have different needs. And that's where I'll come back to these things that lead to the teamwork that's so essential. Without compassion, you aren't going to be as effective as a leader as you can. You aren't going to be supporting someone in the way that they need, because compassion is about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And if you can do that, you realize that you have a person on your team who just needs to know. Give me the facts. If you give that person the facts, they are just going to do a great job for you. Some people just need recognition, right? They don't really need the information. They've got the information. They've been doing their job for a while, but they do it so well that nobody pays attention to them. No one ever has to talk to Sue or Fred or whoever it is, because that person gets the job done without ever being spoken to. So through compassion, you realize, hey, give this person some kudos. They're just off, you know, not seeking any glory off in a corner, but they're really looking for it. And then another person, if you put yourself in their shoes, you might realize they're completely stressed out. So as a leader, you want to tell that person, look, how can I help you? What can I do for you? Just the fact that you asked and you listened to them, you may not actually do anything ever to help them, but you already have helped them. Just the fact that someone cares about the fact that they're stressed out, that recognizes it. They don't feel that they're on an island anymore, or at the end of the plank, you know, on a pirate ship with 10 people screaming, pointing swords at them. So you really need that. It's in a way, there's a whole separate, right, situational leadership. Someone came out and did a great job, and I took that program myself, and it benefited me a lot. But to really have situational leadership, you need that compassion. And it doesn't take a lot of time. If you can resonate with that person, if you can zero in on what that person needs to support you, and you can feel their pain, so to speak, understand where they're coming from, not where you're coming from. Bridging that gap will save you so much time. You spend 15 minutes doing that, it might save you 2 hours a week for the rest of your life, you know, because that person becomes more effective, and your relationship with that person becomes more effective. And then you need integrity. Without integrity, forget it, the game's over. You know, the communication doesn't have any vitality. The words that you say do not have any life force if you don't believe them. If that's not something that you're living, I'm sharing with you, right or wrong, how I live my life, what I found to be successful for 30 years, and that has a certain vitality. I could read you from a book saying, oh, this guy did this and it sounds good to me, right? It would not have the same energy or the same force to it. That integrity is the blood. It's the life of words. It's the blood flow of the words, right? The life that is within the words comes from integrity. And then you need commitment. This is very interesting, because someone once commented to me on a project that we're running. He says, geez, you know, that I noticed loyal to me. It doesn't matter. You know, I can't think of anything why someone would have loyalty to me, but yet I have noticed it, and I wondered about it. And I realized the reason why I think people will want to have loyalty to you, have loyalty to things, it comes from, first of all, compassion. They can tell you care about them, you care about the project, you care about the ideas, you care about the client. And then you have integrity. It doesn't mean you're right. We're all wrong sometimes. Nobody's always right. I've been wrong more times than I can count. But that doesn't matter. I don't need to be right to have integrity. I just need to be right to delude myself. You know, that's just part of deluding myself, right? Being right. But that integrity of just saying how I feel and saying what I think, then the commitment means something. And then once people start having that commitment, everything's going to go smoother. It's easier to come to work. It doesn't tire you out as much. You feel like, okay, you know, and again, I'll use the sports analogy, right? You don't want to be if you see the other people dogging it, right? You know, it's hard for you to put in the effort. And that's part of why, you know, I work for a company. I'm not going to name names, where I didn't feel that commitment to that company. I didn't feel that company had that integrity I was looking for. So it was a much more tiring to get through my day, frankly, you know. And with working for SDI, I probably working harder than I ever have in my life, and I'm loving it more than I ever have in my life, and I have more energy than I've ever had because I believe in the people here and I like the people I work with, and that's what that commitment. And then you can get to the teamwork. So I don't feel we can't really choose between these. Without that commitment, you don't really have a team. And without integrity, the commitment doesn't mean anything. And without that compassion, how can you have integrity? Without that compassion, you're coming from a very parochial view. And that's just a story. That's not integrity. That's just you living out your story. And finally, just to wrap up on the leadership, is a yogic master from the East, Yogi Bhajan, who, not to get into his biography, but if you ever want to look it up, he's started many businesses in the East and brought a lot of in the West, started a lot of businesses in the West, brought a lot of information out of the East. And one thing that he predicted that I heard him say decades ago, and I can't tell you, I believe it was in the 90s, but even earlier. And if you think about it back then, right, there wasn't smartphones, there wasn't email. It was a very different world. But he said then, in the future, computers will become more human. And humans will become more like computers. And now we see this everywhere. There's lots of talk about computers and how they've become more human. But no one's really talking about the other side to that coin. And there are two sides to that coin, that humans have become more like computers. You go to a restaurant now, and even two young people, hey, wonderful, you're young, you're dating, you're in love, how wonderful. And they're each sitting there looking at their iPhones, like machines. And of course, we see this all the world, and we can't talk to a person, we get into menus and voicemails, and we get so used to interacting with computers and technology that we start reflecting that. Much like they say a dog or a cat will take after its master. We're starting to take after our master, and our master is technology. So really, probably one of the most important messages I can share in this is, don't let the iPhone work for you. Don't work for the iPhone. You know, you're the boss. You're the boss of your future. You're the project leader. You're the project team member. So you've got to make technology work for you, and don't get caught up in trying to work for the technology. And I could go into this in a subject in itself, but I'll just briefly, right. One of the things I found, it was very hard. I'm a very disciplined person, and yet I found this very difficult. And that's to not check my iPhone. To know that it's okay to look through all my emails every few hours. And it was very hard to instill that discipline in every so often. It's really helped me a lot, and I know it'll help you too. And I know it's not easy. It wasn't for me anyway. So to succeed, in closing this section, to succeed, we must reduce stress by balancing technology with a human element. And now, my friends, for all leaders in different ways and in different environments, overly aggressive scheduling I wish I had as many insights to offer on this as I did on as I do on leadership, but you know, the pitfall really is not so much in the aggressive schedule, because that can be hard to avoid, and we'll talk about that, but it's allowing an aggressive schedule to set the tone for the entire project in a negative way. So what happens, they'll say, oh, here's an aggressive schedule, let's go get it, how can we do it? Or the other team just scored a goal, let's get out there and score one ourselves, right? It's in a negative way. It's immediately like, oh, look what's been done to me, look what's happened to me. And it's almost like a hopelessness that can come in like a fog, right? And you're just like, everyone's wondering what happened to the sun. So again, curious your thoughts, if you could share them. What's the biggest contributor to aggressive scheduling? The competitive environment, the drive for more business, Amazon in the world of instant access, or working in silos within your company are open?
Okay, I've shared the poll, so please, like we did before, we'll be waiting for your answers. Okay, we've got almost all the answers in. Oh, last one in. Okay, I'll close it and share the answers. Share. So, we actually have, it's pretty split, divided opinion. So 40% competitive environment, 13% drive for more business, 20% blames Amazon and the world of instant access, and 27% working in silo within your company. That would be me.
Well, again, so these are very interesting results, and these are a little surprising and less surprising. I mean, certainly the 40% competitive environment, right? We all, everyone out in the business world, we all realize that it is a very competitive environment, and you know, it's one of the things sometimes that we remind ourselves internally within our company, right? Someone will say like, why did we agree to this schedule? Because if we did, the other guy would have gotten the job, you know. And it doesn't even mean that the other person could have done it within that time frame. They're just saying they can to get the job. So the drive for more business, you know, we're all, that's what we're here for. You know, we're here to get business and earn money, and that's how all the people, our colleagues, you know, are able to put food on the table. And the salespeople, that's really almost their sole job. And then Amazon was 20%. That was very interesting. I thought that people would say, what are you, nuts? You know, why do you even put that on there? But at least some people see that as and it's very interesting. There was at the RILA, the retail conference for executives in Phoenix. I was there recently, and a lot of futurists talking about it. And what's happened is this world of instant access has really changed people's perceptions. It used to be, you know, 20 years ago, that if people had to wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it was no big deal. Now people measure having to wait like in seconds. And you see this, a great example is traffic, right? Look how traffic has changed now. People just, I stopped at Starbucks this morning, and yes, I'm a disciplined person, but I guess not when it comes to that. And it's not a long line. The line is 3 people long. There's one person in front of me giving an order. There's me, and there's someone who came in just behind me. And the person's giving their order, and I don't know, my mind was somewhere else. And I hear this person behind me cursing, like, why is it taking so long? And like swearing under breath. And I'm like, wow. It's like, you know, I haven't been in line very long myself. I haven't been listening to the conversation going on in front of me, but I can tell you it had to be under 2 minutes that I've been standing there. And I don't know how long this person was there. At most 2 minutes. At most, he walked in right behind me. But anyway, so we're seeing this, right? We're seeing this everywhere. And so what happens is that it's just all in this context that people are putting stuff out to bid and asking for work to be done and asking for answers. It's like someone said, I mean, right, I'll give you an example, right? We've all had this experience. Someone calls and says, how come you haven't gotten back to me yet? I'm sorry, what didn't I get back to you on? Well, I sent you an email about such and such. I said, wow, I don't know what happened. I guess your email didn't come through. Well, geez, it says I sent it. Now I've learned to ask, when did you send it? Oh, just before I called. Well, you know, okay. So, right, we've all had that. It's crazy. So now when that people like outrage haven't gotten back to them, I've learned you have to ask, when did you try to get hold of me? And then try to level set expectations. And it's tough. It's the client, your boss. So a rule of thumb I use is I tell people, like, you know, I return all emails within 24 hours. Now, in reality, I check my email, you know, every 2 to 3 hours. I do try to not let it run my life. So I do try to step away from it and every 2 to 3 hours get to it, right? That's my own personal approach. Everyone's got to find what works for them in their job. But I do believe it's very corrosive to have it dinging. I do believe you want it silent. Don't constantly be interrupting yourself. If you were talking and someone's constantly interrupting you, you'd want to strangle them at some point, right? So why are you letting your phone do that to you? And you're choosing to have it interrupt you. Anyway, enough on that. So, you know, level set expectations. So that's why I tell people 24 hours for emails. Typically, I do within a few hours. But what if I'm flying coast to coast, right? I might be on a plane 6 hours. I might be in an all-day meeting. And by setting that expectation, I return within 24 hours. There's very few things that won't do. And that way you can go home at night. And you know what? Maybe you rest. Maybe you deserve to have the night off. You've already worked a 10-hour day, you know? So don't set that expectation that if they email you at 8 at night, you're going to reply to them at 9 at night. There are very few things that can't wait till the next morning, no matter what you are. I think if you really believe that's not true, you probably, well, never mind. You have a realistic view of yourself, or maybe you need to trust others more. And then working in silos within your company. Again, that was very interesting because that had 27% as well. And I do believe that's a big factor. And absolutely, because people are making commitments without realizing the total impact it has. So each of these, right, impact schedules that are committed to. The competition forces our hand. Our culture is to do whatever it takes to get business. And that's just ingrained in our culture. It's not the salesperson's fault or that person's fault or the president's fault, right? It's really a cultural thing that, you know, you need to go out and do whatever it takes. I'd say probably 95% of businesses plus operate that way. The world of instant access drives unrealistic expectations, and sales is often an independent force. And they're structured that way. Everybody, you know, doing a job to move things forward, whether it's in software, installations, engineering, manufacturing, they're just driving, they're pushing forward. And then sales is out there as an independent force, while these others are working in silos. And sometimes even the sales forces, if you've got a bigger sales force, can be in silos. And part of that doesn't know, you know, your company might be bidding 4 projects. If you get all 4, you could have some real challenges on your hand. But realistically, there's multiple people bidding it. You know, no one has that type of batting average unless you're a utility company. So these factors are going to continue to exist. That's the bottom line, right? The bottom line is we understand why it is. So there's no need to get discouraged or to think that someone should not be letting this happen, right? It is going to happen. That is the reality of all of our worlds. Unless you're the CEO of a company and you've got something that no one else has, like a utility that gives you electricity, and you either go without lights or you have the utility company. But for the rest of us, right, it's a reality. So the first thing to deal with an aggressive schedule is to tackle the challenge immediately. It's very easy to have that ostrich effect, right? To put your head in the sand. I don't see the danger coming, so I guess I'm safe now, right? I mean, we all do that sometimes. It's a way to deal with stress. But just tackle the challenge immediately. Just whatever it is, put it on the table. And then tackle it together as a team. Don't, you know, if there's someone who's 4 steps downstream, let them know now, right? Don't wait. In the path to less stress and more visibility, again, have a project launch. We have in our company project launch on major projects. It's already paying big dividends for us, and we're already having a greater challenge. For instance, there's a project where we're going live in now that it was initiated before there was a project launch. And one of the many facets of the project launch is to have a good handoff between the sales group and so forth and the people who are going to make it happen. But we didn't have a project launch, and everyone thought they understood the needs, but there were some holes. We recovered great. We filled those gaps, but it cost our company some significant money and tied up significant resources because it became an all hands on deck situation. And it could have been resolved with a few hours of conversation, could have prevented all that problem. And it's happened with every company I work for. So you need to tackle the challenge immediately. You need to do it as a team. These project launches, that's really kind of our internal thing. I'll talk a little bit about the project launch concept. Understand and align with client expectations. That's what, is just referring to. It's very important. Again, it gets back to that working in silos, right? People saying, yeah, that's one of the causes. And I agree with you. That is one of the causes. And it's always going to happen with the sales because it's a different nature. But now, once you have it, that's the time when you've got to bridge that gap and no more silos. Again, and it gets back to that communication. It's not vertical communication anymore. It's lateral. It's not a boss saying, okay, here's what we did. So here's what you do. Here's what you do. Here's what you do. It's, we have a contract. How are we collectively going to deal with that? And like I say, get others involved early on. Recognize who's impacted by project management. I got to tell you, everyone I showed this to was surprised, including me. I started putting this together, and then every time I thought about it, I realized I was still leaving someone out. So the PMO just stands for your project management organization, whatever form that takes within your company. There are all these people impacted it, right? The field wiring folks, they've got all their schedules, the installation laboring. It ultimately ends up impacting the invoicing, because if you're not making milestones and things, then you can't invoice, and then you can get into cash flow problems. You've got a host interface to deal with early on. Hopefully, software and controls, design feedback, right? Part of that project management is tying that end result into what was done up front, so that your engineering group continue evolving, continue getting better, and they can add kind of street smarts of the people, the frontline soldiers. Street smarts can get back to the engineers who have a very important view, but a very different view. So that design feedback, the training, right? Ultimately, again, if there isn't proper training, that can lead to tying up a lot of other resources. Manufacturing, proposal specs, what's being put out there in the proposals. Is it clear? Is it clearly describing what you're going to provide? So you're not trying to catch up with aligning expectations later on. Sales, give that feedback to sales on the impact of their choices, and the procurement and the commissioning. Right. So all those areas are impacted. Project scheduling, to end well, we need to start well, to hold an internal meeting and larger projects face-to-face meetings. Include all departments impacted. And I just listed a few: the account manager, the project manager, software, controls, manufacturing, etc. And it gets back to that other slide, right? There's so many people involved. You really got to think through that. These are just a few examples. And one of the reasons I did put these few examples in is that some of the areas that become, in a lot of companies I've seen, disconnected is first the account manager. A lot of times the account manager is viewed in a company that his or her job is done once the sale is made. And that is a big mistake. There has to be, you can't have the salesperson put the baton on the floor and then the PM come and the project manager picks the baton up off the floor. It will lead to failures that sometimes won't, it'll be like an underlying cancer that won't surface till the very end of the project. The client won't catch it in the drawings and in the discussions and in the things, you know, all that's fine. But when they go there and they're looking around and they're trying to run their product and the operations guys get there, right, they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Here's what I need. Yeah, isn't that what we talked about? So, right, it circles back every time. And I want to dispel a myth here. I could have put this on a poll. This would have been an interesting question too, is the thing. So there's I think a common perception, and I myself fall into this trap at times, that a small project is easier to manage than a big project. And not only is it not easier, it's often more difficult, because what happens is there's a bigger budget on the big project. So there's a lot more people involved. So you've got all the different people representing different roles are involved. With a small project, you don't have all those people. So suddenly now the project manager is suddenly being asked also maybe to do some of the procurement and some of the engineering and some of this and some of that, right? Because there aren't as many people involved. So so many people are doing jobs they don't. And the other thing is this perception that there's still as many pieces to it. So a smaller project, you still have customer expectations. You still have things to procure. You still have things to manufacture. You still need an installer. You still need an electrician. You still need everything you need in a big project. You need in a small project. Only you don't have the resources. And guess what? I can order 10,000 feet of conveyor as easily as I can order 2,000 feet of conveyor. But the problem with a 2,000 foot conveyor order is no one's paying attention to it. No one's even looking, is it the right type of belt or things like that, because you don't have the same quality people involved. And so it's a big myth. So beware of the smaller projects. And by the way, you've got the same thing on the client's end. With a big project, you've got people on the client end, the operations people are involved. They've got their engineers involved, high-level people involved, project managers involved. Small projects, sometimes it's just the CEO or someone of a small company who says, here's what I want, and gives this kind of anecdotal picture of what they want. And then you're trying to deliver something based on this anecdotal understanding of something that's going to be delivered for some amount of money. So beware of the small projects and give them some love too. And right up front, you need to align on the scope of work, client expectations, rates, right? What capacities? Schedule, propose, what's achievable, cutovers, go live. Beware of whatever key milestones were agreed to early on. And roles, know the roles, the key project leads and responsibilities. It's going to be different for every project. I've been doing this 30 years. You get a different cast of characters, literally characters, right? And I mean that in a good way. We all have our individuality and our individual strength. You got a different set of characters for each one, and sometimes you got to be very aware that you might be asking something very atypical of them. You might be asking a salesperson to get involved with project management. You may be asking, anyway, I won't bother through all the examples, but beware of the roles and be very clear of the roles. Who's going to create the schedule? Who's going to describe the functional requirement? Who's ordering the materials? Who's going to make sure the materials are ordered, on and on. And you really need to understand the high-level needs for in-house manufacturing, the procurement materials, the installation labor, the wiring, software, interface, what documentation is required, what are the call-outs, and what's the level of operational uniqueness at new design? Because this plays a big role in the level of difficulty in executing the project successfully. A big project that's fairly straightforward and fairly typical is much more likely to go well than a small project that has a lot of uniqueness, that someone doing something very differently. So then from there, going to the big picture, you need in project leadership, you need to have one set of priorities for all areas. Prioritize the new project, keeping in mind current work, right? Don't let the new project just derail what's already on the table. And then look at all the various components from the view of a common set of priorities. And as you're awarded the new projects, incorporate them into the overall plan and avoid latest and loudest scheduling. Don't just look at the new project in a vacuum. You really have to look at it in the context of what's already going on. Again, the project launch lays the foundation for the project to move forward. And this just kind of shows all the things that come off of that project launch. You've got client expectations, capacity requirements, reviewing the design, whatever that means in your world, the software controls, the host interface. Then all that generates other things downstream of the project. And kind of on the other side of that, you look at all your resources and you come back to that detailed schedule. And again, the aggressive schedule you can't avoid. Sometimes you just get that up front, but you really have to look at how you're going to do it, what you're going to do, you know, have visibility, let your client know where you see your pain points are. Look at, do I have to contract labor instead of using our in-house labor? Do I have to maybe outsource some of the things we might normally do in manufacturing? So all these things need to be weighed up front. Again, have that full visibility throughout. Again, you've got this aggressive schedule, but bad news doesn't get better to age, right? You don't want to have rose-colored glasses. Don't just be like, okay, we'll get there, we'll get there, we'll get there. Okay, we're not going to get there. You know, a project does not go from being on schedule to being 3 weeks behind in a day. So you want to constantly monitor it and be realistic about where you're at. So you can adjust accordingly and you can make sure that client expectations are in line in their business plans. Project management tools, obviously detailed schedule, cadence of regular meeting, documenting minutes, concise, bullet point. Again, that gets into there's too much information, so you want to really try to be concise. Identify the open issues in an owner, right? So whatever needs to be done, you want to identify that. And then project status, right? Issue it weekly. So these are not things to avoid aggressive schedules, but this is how you deal with the reality of what's in front of you. And again, the main thing in dealing with schedule is the credo, like paste it, you know, should be on your forehead, right? Pass on information and requests for information immediately. If you know someone's going to need to do something, get it done in 4 weeks, and it's going to take them a week to do it, don't wait 3 weeks to tell them. Tell them now, I need this in 4 weeks. It gives them respect. It shows respect for them. It shows respect for what they do. And you don't want to be the one holding anything up. You want to put it in their hands as quick as you can. And it's reducing their stress and giving them the best chance to succeed, which gives the project the best chance to succeed. And another way is, as the saying goes, I heard this once and I love this saying, lack of planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on my part. So that's the other extreme, right? You do this, and like a bid proposal, and suddenly it's like, oh, I got this bid due. I need this. It's Friday, but I really need to know how much this is going to cost by Monday. And I'm like, really? By Monday? Yeah, the bid's due on Monday. Really, the bid's due on Monday, and you just got the bid request today? No, I got the bid request 3 weeks ago. Oh, and didn't you know then that you would need me to cost this out? You know, so come on, be respectful. That's all. You know, it's tough, right? Because you've got a lot to do. We've all got a lot to do. Like, am I going to get through everything I've done? But when you don't need to return emails every hour or every minute, but when you do it every few hours, if there's something that is going to require activity on someone else's part, immediately forward that email to them and make that request. And then the last critical third leg of it is one owner. 2 or more tasks equals no owner. And I'll kind of revert to hockey because that's what I play. In hockey, there's a saying, you know, two guys happen to be in the same part of the ice, which, like with soccer and other sports, you try in basketball, you try to avoid having two people in the same spot, right? But it happens sometimes. So two people go in the same spot, and they both look at the puck, and the other team comes by and grabs the puck. And the saying is that, well, each of those two guys or two women thought Joe was going to get the puck, but Joe wasn't on the ice. And that's the problem. The moment you have more than one person assigned to someone, each one can think the other's doing it. So you either end up with two people doing the same thing or neither doing it. And I mean, I just had a call this morning from someone because we have a project, and normally I have one project manager, but we've got, due to reasons I'm not going to get into, we have a couple different people involved in the project. And it's like the person was calling, what do you want me to do? What's this person doing? I'm like, okay, yes, we have the four project managers need to get together and have our own powwow, because the fact that there's four project managers is a big problem, you know. So more isn't always better, you know, certainly in that case. And finally, and this is the last thing I'll say about aggressive scheduling that I'll close with on this piece of the top subjects. To handle aggressive scheduling and multiple priorities, teamwork and visibility are more essential than ever. Recognize the importance of everyone you deal with. I deal with so many people. It's what I love about project management. And I've never yet in 30 years to meet a person who wasn't important to the project. You know, and even if the important thing is for them to get out of the way, it's still important. Still show respect for their job and what they do. And if someone else is already covering it, let them know they're covering it, you know. It isn't that everyone has to be involved with it, but everyone should be respected and deserves to be respected. And their job is important, even if it doesn't happen to apply to a particular job or a particular project. Okay, then the last thing is reacting emotionally and people shutting down and just the stress. And I'll tell you what, if this isn't on your radar, it better be, because this is the way the world's going. I'm sure everyone on this, in this webinar, everyone participating here would agree that they've seen stress levels increase. You look at the roads, you look at the, you know, there's lots of examples throughout the world that I don't need to get into, we all know, but it's happening in the business place too. It's becoming really one of the biggest challenges, just staying level-headed to make good decisions. So to me, when I look at that root cause, what's causing this stress? What's causing people to react? I think this is the biggest pitfall, and it's the use and the misuse of the diverse array of communication tools. We've got all these communication tools now, but no one's ever taught us how to use them. Even in schools, they don't teach people today. Even in colleges, I have a son and daughter. Well, they're not in college anymore, but they were. And you know, they don't really teach them this. It's something I've worked to teach my son and daughter myself. And the failure to leverage that communication to reduce stress. You can, communication is just like a tool. It's a tool, right? You can take a hammer and you can bludgeon someone to death. Or you can take a hammer and you can build a beautiful deck in your backyard. I've done both in my lifetime. I'm not proud to say. I am pretty proud of the deck. I'm not so proud of the time I bludgeoned people. And that was, I'll say, earlier in my career. But really, you can, you know, it's not, communication is just a tool. It's up to you, the intelligence and the heart behind that tool as to how you use it. And ergo, increase efficiency, right? Because if you can leverage that communication to reduce stress, you're increasing efficiency. More time getting things done, less time reacting. How to deal with that stress? Well, people are overwhelmed. There's a feeling of lack of stability in the world. The bombardment of information can be paralyzing. So all these things are creating more and more stress in the workplace. The impact of that stress undermines projects. It creates a sideways motion, and it generates time-consuming distractions, and it slows down forward progress. So, quick poll. What is your preferred method for communicating? Holding meetings, emailing, calling, or texting?
Okay, so the poll is launched. So, yeah, preferred method for communicating, holding meetings, email, calling, or texting. Everyone was quicker answering this one. So I'm missing just a couple of answers. Last minute votes. Okay, I'll close the poll for now and show you the results.
So again, thank you for participating. Very interesting. So it's pretty well balanced between holding meetings, emailing, calling, and texting.
Texting's pretty low, actually.
Yes. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I do think you're going to find that changing somewhat. The generation coming out of that's in college right now, what is it they call it? They call it the X generation. The new generation is referred to as the I generation. And that's the generation that grew up with iPhones. And I'll tell you what, the I generation texts all the time, So I do think you'll see that shift a bit. Calling, I think, is way underutilized. I agree. I do think it deserves a lot of weight, but it is underutilized. But again, the key really is not so much the best way to communicate, because they all have value and they all have a place. And I think it's important for each of us to recognize that we have a default mode of communicating. I mean, there's some project managers I work with who will almost never pick up a phone. And yet I have another project manager who almost always picks up the phone. And they each have their downfalls. If I'm a project manager, I'm always using the phone. I get that great customer-client interaction. You get to the bottom of things. But then sometimes when something doesn't happen, it's like, well, this person doesn't know about it because I had a conversation with one person, but the other three don't know what that conversation was about because it was a phone call. And likewise, if someone's always emailing, there can be misunderstandings because it's not a back and forth. So, and some, by the way, even go off the grid as a way of dealing with stress. So some people, their preferred method isn't any of the four, it's a fifth. Their preferred method of communicating is to not communicate. And also, every company has those. It's a reality. And for some people, it just becomes a survival mechanism to get through the day. And frankly, I do that sometimes. I go off the grid sometimes myself. Not for very long, because there's people who know how to chase me down. But so each has an appropriate application and function. So first, we really need to align on the what, who, and when of communicating, right? Not really we as a group need to align on that, but you really need to think about yourself and your own organization. How do you want to use these tools within your organization? So the what of meetings, right? When some examples, when you've got to align on a common vision, you want to brainstorm, you want to problem solve. Those are all places you want meetings, right? And what you want to do in those meetings is very important, because we're teamwork now. It's not a hierarchical society. It won't go over well. You want to solicit input where all have an equal voice, and someone needs to be a strong leader in there that's going to make sure that everyone's heard and no one person is dominating the conversation. The win of meeting, well, those project launches that we talked about, when you have weekly meetings, when you have a schedule review, certainly you want to do that as a group. When you're defining or aligning on requirements, some type of alignment required, that's when it's time to meet. And the who of meeting is the key stakeholders. Really think through who needs to be there and make sure you don't leave anyone out. Emails. Well, any request that requires action on the part of another, always email. You want them to be clear on the expectation, clear on what's required, and you confirm commitment. You can use it for follow-up. So I'll share with you the tool that I've used. Works very well for me. I have a folder for each project. And what I'll do is I'll start by asking someone, because if I need something in 2 weeks, I'll ask them first. Maybe they'll tell me a week and a half, If they tell me 3 weeks, I'll say, no, I need it in 2 weeks, and here's why. So it gives me a chance to explain why I need it. It gives a chance for it to be their commitment, not something I've imposed on them. And then when they give me an anecdotal commitment, like, I need it, that'll take me about a week. I said, okay, well, today's the 22nd, so you have it the 29th? Oh, how about, we'll say I'll get it out to you by the 2nd. And that's a typical conversation. So that's the first thing. Let them say it. Make sure you're confirming it was specific, not anecdotal. and then send an email. Hey, thanks. This is just to confirm our conversation. I'll look forward, you know, you'll have this to me by 4. I'll look forward to receiving it. And then put that in a follow-up folder, and now it's on your radar, or use your calendar or whatever tool works for you. But now I find it's much more effective than, instead of calling saying, hey, I never got this, and you know, you said it'd be here in a week, and some conversation we had at some time, you made some type of commitment. Instead, I forward that same email, and it allows you to be more polite about it. You don't have to so much remind them, because you're already forwarding that email where it's reminding them that, hey, there's a conversation here, there's an agreement here. And then you just say, hey, we still on track to ship, you know. So then on the 30th, I say, hey, we still on track to ship this Monday? And you just forward the email. You don't even have to mention it. They see the email trail, right? And they're like, oh yeah, I did agree on the 2nd. And that I find really works well, a great, reply versus reply all, just be conscious. When's it appropriate to just reply? I'll give you an example of reply. Thank someone. Or it's very interesting. I sent something one time out on communication internally, an invite to everyone about, hey, here's the information. And some people were doing reply all. Well, I sent this email to 30 people. I sent it to everyone, including the CEO, who's going to be at this group meeting we were going to have. And so when people do a reply all, I'll be there, they're letting 30 people know, including the CEO, that they're going to be there. And if a dozen of the 30 people do that, that's a dozen emails that the CEO gets dinged with, and everyone else gets dinged with, because everyone's important and everyone, you know, struggles with their time. So be careful that reply all, and also make sure everyone's on the email who should be. If you see someone who's been left out and needs to know about it, then what I do is I do a reply all, and I say, adding Lucy. And now she's in the chain. As there's more conversation around it that Lucy needs to know about, she's in the loop. So I just, a simple reply, adding Lucy. It gets her in the chain, and it lets the person know, hey, don't forget about Lucy. So it's sort of letting everyone know, reminding them that Lucy's on the team. Calls and texts, you know, again, one-on-one discussion. Always when you need a quick answer, don't expect people to be slaves to their email. If you need an immediate answer, give them a call or text. So, to summarize on that, to avoid failure, we must recognize and consciously correct our broken communication. Our communication today is very broken. It really is. And it's not our fault. The communication modalities have just changed so drastically. It's so easy to bury people, and no one's told us not to bury people. So sometimes we do bury people with emails, or we add to the avalanche. So these are the topics we've covered: project leadership, scheduling, and teamwork, and effective communication. I'll now open up for a few questions.
Thank you very much, Jim. Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. If you have any more questions, you can still add them on. We'll try to get to them. So the first question was regarding the second pitfall, which was leadership. No, sorry, that was the first one. It was about the schedule, and when you were mentioning that working in silos is often a problem for the project schedule. What should the role of the account manager be in those cases?
So it's very interesting. I'll say twofold. First is the account manager's role is to make sales. They are not going to be thinking downstream about the project. I think the project manager project leadership needs to be the one at 50,000 feet. So I think the project leadership needs to hold the account manager accountable for passing on that information. He has to call, you know, bring that account manager into the fold and make sure all that information is disseminated. Now, you can say that's the account manager's job, but frankly, their mentality is always going to be to make sales. The project leadership is the one who owns making it happen. And I think they have to go after, so to speak, the account manager and make sure that happens. And then the second thing I think is your project leadership has to always be provide as much visibility with high-level reporting to the sales organization on what the current backlogs are and everything is. Not that you'll walk away from a sale, but you have to understand, if you do something during this window, it means that we're going to be working overtime in our facility, so there's going to be maybe a little less margin in it, which is okay, but at least they're making informed decisions. So it's twofold. When projects are awarded, project leadership has to bring them into the loop. And even when projects proactively, aside from projects being awarded, provide that information to them. Backlogs in your shop, installation crews, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is kind of tricky. The question is it possible to identify all those symptoms from the beginning, or do we really just discover them as the project goes on?
It's absolutely possible to discover them at the beginning, is my experience. There are very few things, there are things that will come up, but there's very few things that you couldn't find those symptoms and those issues at the beginning and have your eyes wide open, and it often comes down to communication. The engineering gaps is rarely because the engineer wasn't a good engineer. It's almost always because the engineer didn't understand something about the client expectation. You know, when a client gets really upset with something or suddenly finds out it's a 5-week delay, you know, like a schedule doesn't suddenly become 3 weeks delayed. So I do believe that those things, and you're going to miss them, but you've got to just learn from that. And you learn the strengths and weaknesses of your organization. So you see where the misses are, and then it's important to think about how to avoid it. And one of the things I found is the project launch, that I think that can catch a lot of the, you know, these symptoms in advance.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. Another question is, what, apart from these or including these, what are the key tools for project management and avoiding those pitfalls?
Well, yeah, and this was actually in one of the slides, but so the key tools is, the most important tool is communication. And it needs to be that verbal communication. Teamwork, fostering teamwork is an important tool. And those are kind of the soft tools, if you will. Communication, teamwork, fostering, you know, people caring about each other and teamwork. And the hard tools, if you will, are schedules, which, you know, everything in moderation, right? If it's too detailed, but a schedule built in reality, a schedule built with everyone's input, an action tracker, something to track. What are the open issues? What are the things not on the schedule that need to happen? Where someone said, hey, someone needs to take care of it. Find it, you know, make sure you have a clear owner for it. Make sure you have a clear when do we need it by, and how important it is, and those types of things. And we have a very specific action tracker that we use on projects to track the open issues. That's an important tool. So the schedule, the action tracker, and minutes, those are the three most important physical tools.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. We don't have any more questions for the moment. We'll launch the final poll to know about how satisfied you were with this webinar. If you still have another question, you can just write it down and we'll get to it right away. Or just let us know, and you can contact us later on if you want to have further discussion on the topic. So, Jim, thank you very much. And we're looking forward to the next webinar with you.
Thank you. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you to everyone. If you have, as I was saying, any further questions, you can just let us know by email. At this moment, we will be closing the webinar for today. So again, thank you very much, Jim. Thank you very much, and see you on the next webinar.
Thanks.